I know the sea is deep, and the shoreline keens and punches. Above me, cops trawl for clues. They find matchbooks at the cliff edge, beat-up Converse jilted in the heather. Give them what they need, keep what you know. I know your height, your street. My fingers shake. You hated sports and liars and not being high. Limbs loud like mixtapes, we grabbed fistfuls of skin at recess. Rolled your cigarettes, wore your jeans slung low for late night dares. Your eyes on me when you said yes to the roiling kick and the depths of rooftop jumps. Landing hard on concrete, wishing it were beach soft. Gulls nudge and shriek as they wheel out the gurney, your feet twisted under polythene. The papers said we climbed too far, that accidents happen. But I was up there with you, like before. I know you removed your shoes, that your blonde hair flew like a slap.
C'est la nuit. Pluie. Les lumières du cinéma se répètent par terre. La foule sort, se disperse. Reste deux femmes et un parapluie au coin de la rue.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Poetry to Your Ears. Today with Rebecca Faulkner. Hello.
Hi there, Lulu and Tom. It's great to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much for being on the show. I'm gonna read your bio on your upcoming book, Permit Me to Write My Own Ending, published by Write Bloody UK. Rebecca Faulkner is a London-born poet based in Brooklyn, New York. She's the 2022 winner of Sandhills Literary Magazine's National Poetry Contest and the 2021 Prometheus and Bound Poetry Competition. Her work has been anthologized in the Best New British and Irish Poets 2019 to 2021 and published in journals in the UK and USA. Rebecca was a 2021 Poetry Fellow at the Southeastern Foundation for the Arts. She holds a BA in English Literature and Theatre Studies from the University of Leeds and a PhD from the University of London. She is currently at work on her second collection, exploring female identity and artistic endeavour. That's quite a impressive bio, huh?
Thank you. Yeah, it's funny to hear it read back.
Yeah. So now you got like a lot of poetry publications in a couple of years, and now this is your debut collection. Can you like tell us what prompted you to publish all these poetry all of a sudden, you know?
Yeah, it does seem like all of a sudden, doesn't it? I know.
Yeah. In the acknowledgements, it says it's been you've been really building this collection over a long time. Really, it's been a long time coming. This collection.
Yeah, it definitely has. Permit Me to Write My Own Ending, I say at the end of the book, is a lifetime's labour. So it's been gestating for a long time. It really took a pandemic, I think, for me to share my poetry. So I've been writing for a really long time, but sort of just for myself and unsure about whether I should share it. And it's actually 3 years ago, isn't it? It's amazing, the start of the pandemic. So during the first lockdown here in Brooklyn, New York, I was furloughed from my day job and stuck with my family in a small apartment, feeling frightened like all of us and unsure of what was happening. And
in New York or in London?
In New York, yeah. No, I've lived in Brooklyn, in New York for almost half my life now. I came here a long time ago, and I've got 2 teenage daughters. We live in New York. The beginning of the lockdown, I really lent into my poetry and I sort of took a leap off a cliff and not only began to share some of it on Instagram and then had a really amazing response, but I also started to take more writing workshops, which were available, via Zoom once we were a few months into the pandemic, and then had an amazing response from other poets who were saying, oh, you really need to share this. This is really great. And it gave me a lot of confidence, and the sort of the rest continued from there. And I began to submit to literary journals in the UK and the US, and And I just couldn't believe the response. Just began to publish a lot, and that was incredible for me. And then so I had a residency in 2021 at the Salt and Stall Foundation in upstate New York, and that was really pivotal. I met a lot of other artists and writers who said, "You've got a book. You've got so much poetry. Just let's work on a book." And I worked with an editor and worked really, really hard, and so kind of the book just all
definitely
spilled
to
out.
me. That's the thing that really stuck out to me is like how mature your poetry is when you started writing 3 years ago, and how much how like involved you are already, like in all of the different poetry scenes. Like you had the residency and everything, and the structure of your book, I just feel like everything is thought out. And when I was reading it, there was some things I didn't like quite understand the intent, and I was so glad to have access to the author to like ask the questions.
Good. That's well, hopefully I can shed some light on my intention.
But, I mean in a positive way, because it's like it's got so much depth that it brings some images, it brings some colors to me, and I just want to know more about what the specific intentions behind like the structure, for example. So like what I noticed, for example, is you start chronologically your story, so from a child to a teenager, and then to like a mother, so that's in New York. So the start is in London, and then it's in New York, and then suddenly it shifts to the past. And so that's something that you explained, that it's to show historical trauma and the way it affects us. Stories of the past affect us. And then is it that stories in London and Germany that kind of collide together, or is there a path that you follow in that?
Yeah, I felt really determined with the chronology of the poems for it to not be linear, and to not, to not end with the speaker as an adult now. I think that, the way that memory works, and certainly the way I write, is that even if I'm focused on writing poems about adolescence in London, that, memories and memories from my family creep in. That's one of the reasons I wanted to include a lot of Blitz and Second World War poetry, just in terms of family memory and historical trauma. But also that, I end the book by returning to some childhood memories and returning to poems about childhood. And I think that's really important. That's how we experience our own memories and our own subconscious. And so it was very intentional, the non-linear aspect of the collection.
Yeah. And so you're kind of telling the story of maybe your grandparents during the Blitz, and do you have relatives in Germany as well?
I spent a lot of time in Germany myself as a teenager, so there's poems in there that are about that experience. We have a lot of friends and family who are in Berlin still, and my father grew up in London during the Blitz, and so the combination of those things, and he was a history teacher, so it all looms very large for me, just in terms of the war and the impact of the war, and it was crucial for me that it was a central component of the book.
Yeah,
your incredible poem Alexanderplatz, that you won an award for this, or that was the Prometheus Unbound award from 2021, which it won the grand prize for that. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and that's fantastic. Really, it's it's like it just evokes so many images. That's about the experience of Kristallnacht.
Yes.
It's and maybe your modern kind of recollections related to that as well.
Yes, there's certainly a lot going on in the poem Alexanderplatz. The experience of youth and finding oneself in East Berlin at a very specific time. I was there as you know, just after the wall came down, and I had a very formative experience in Berlin, but also just aware that it's a city of ghosts, and the building that I lived in when I was there was still riddled with bullet holes from Kristallnacht. So it felt very real and very alive to me. And some of the people that I met and the experiences I had, it just collapsed time. I'm really interested in the way that memory can collapse time.
Yeah. So how much would you say history is a part of your poetry in general?
Oh, a huge part. Yeah, very much so. I feel that, you know, place and history. So the importance of London, the importance of Berlin, and then I'm slightly more vague about the place, the US placelessness. You know, I write about the USA in slightly more broad way, but for sure, London and the place and history, very important to me as a writer.
Yeah, and
if I could just jump in there, Lou. And you have a poem about Brighton Beach, but I'm assuming it's the New York Brighton Beach.
Yes, it's the New York Brighton Beach.
I didn't know that was a beach.
I think Eloise has all these questions about England.
No, it's confusing. I know Brighton Beach is. I think in some ways that's probably subconsciously why I chose it too. You know, Brighton Beach is at Coney Island at the end of the F train line, which is my subway line. So yeah, I wanted to.
Yeah, I was wondering what F was.
Yeah,
I mean, to me, that Brighton Beach, I really love that poem. It just shows, you know, the collapsing of time, as you say, because in the poem, so you're giving birth, and you're remembering a night out with a friend, and it's all in the memories, and it comes all together, and. If I understand, your friend died. Did she?
Yes, the speaker's in the poem. The speaker's friend dies at the end, and the speaker is very close to this young woman who shares her own trauma, her history of trauma with her.
Yeah,
I'm glad that the poem that it landed and made sense, because I think there was a line in it. There's a line in it about my Pitocin kicks in, and I thought, is anyone going to know what I'm talking about? That I'm writing about two things concurrently. I'm writing about labor, and also writing about the past.
Yeah, and so, you know, in your poems you kind of play with voice and who is the I, like who is the speaker. To what extent, I would say, like, is your poetry autobiographical, or you're speaking from the voice of someone else?
It's a really interesting question for all poets to answer, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think, yes, of course, there's autobiography in my poems. I'm very keen to say the speaker all the time, and I feel that Emily Dickinson, you know, tell the truth but tell it slant, that there's a world of characters and a world of different me's in these poems. So yes, sometimes I feel like I've lived many different lives in different parts of the world. So that feeds in my experience. My lived experience is obviously writ large across many of these poems, but the characters that the speaker engages with, many of them are fictional. You know, I write from the perspective of Dora, Freud's patient. And I imagine, especially in my newest collection, I'm imagining the voice of women artists. They're not my experiences. But they're experiences that I feel connected to, whether it's experiences of loss or trauma or childbirth, you know, the things that I relate to.
Yeah.
Yeah. It sounds to me like you get a lot of inspiration from reading people's accounts, from reading history, from... would that be fair to say?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And I like to do my research too. So I do, you know, certainly for the Blitz poems and the you know, the poems set during the Second World War, that involves lots of, you know, reading of poetry that appeals to me from the period. One poem is literally after Stephen Spender, who's one of my favorite poets. And yes, talking to my family for sure, listening to the language deployed by elderly relatives. Yeah.
It's interesting because we don't really think of doing research for poetry, but it can be essential. You know, there's almost kind of like an emotional, and there's like you say, family historical research that you can be doing as well.
Well, you want to get it right too, especially if you have a father who was a historian, because I was thinking as I wrote the poem Fireweed, you know, that I knew sort of in some part of my mind that there was a weed that grew, or bombweed it was called in London, that grew during the Blitz, this kind of purple weed. But I thought, well, I have to get this right. I have to actually check that this really did happen. And so, sure, I did a fair bit of research into fireweed and how it grew.
Yeah.
So what happened? Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, during the Blitz in London, and certainly in other cities that were bombed by the Nazis, this particular weed that is known as fireweed, it grows in some parts of the United States too, but it was very specific to bombed out buildings in London, and often called, you know, my granny I think called it bombweed, but it grew in the rubble, and so you'd have what for me as a writer is this really incredibly evocative scene of bombed out buildings in the East End with these purple flowers beginning to grow up out of them, and that really spoke to me of resilience, and I wanted to capture that. But at the same time, I knew, you know, I had an image of it in my mind, and then I spent all this time googling fireweed to make sure it was right, and to read about historical accounts of it growing. But there's a beauty in that and a resilience that really resonates for me.
That reminds me of during the pandemic, you know, when we were sequestered, but you know, it's just the seasons continued, right?
Yes,
like nature
yes.
continued. It didn't. Yes. It wasn't affected by the pandemic in the same way humans were.
Right, exactly. The endurance of nature, it continues on, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. So in your research process, is it that you have an idea for a poem and then you want to research the details, or did you read some history books to know more about the period, and then some poems emerged from that?
I think poems emerge in all different ways, don't they? I mean, some of the poems in these collections just literally came forth in a rush of memory, and I didn't feel like I had to go away and read any additional text, or, you know, perhaps I researched some small details, wanted to make sure that I had, you know, I was remembering the place correctly. But yeah, some of them just arrived as poetry often does. You wake up in the morning and you have a line and you think, this is it. And then some poems take a very long time, and I would go back, and certainly the poems with, you know, set during the Blitz, and my poem Alexanderplatz, it took a long time for me to get right. I wanted to make sure that the places I referenced were there, the way I remembered them, and you know, so I definitely did some digging.
Do you want to,
if we could
read a poem?
Yeah. Sorry, Lily,
so we're in the same place then. Would you like to read us a poem?
Sure, I'd be more than happy to. Do you want me to start with anything in particular, or are you happy for me to just jump in?
Could I request Alexanderplatz, actually, since they were kind of talking around that?
Yeah, you're going to have to let me pull it up.
Hey, I hope you're enjoying listening to this episode. This episode is sponsored by Write Bloody UK. They're an independent publisher that publishes bloody beautiful poetry books. You get 10% off all books on their website, writebbloodyuk.co.uk, with the code Poetry to Your Ears. That's 10% off with the code Poetry to Your Ears on the website, writebbloodyuk.co.uk. Hope you enjoy it.
Alexanderplatz. 3 sheets to a brittle wind, I'm unhinged in East Berlin. Burnt chalk taste of trams, and your mouth doesn't stop until Sasha shows us the Jewish cemetery where the roundup started. Thousands dead and broken glass from nights German kids drank to forget their history. This is how the end begins, you say, as I stumble through the tour, peel off to buy cigarettes and green nail polish from the thrift store near Café Oren, where waiters circle the periphery, arranging ghosts inside napkins. You claim center stage, take us hostage with your history lesson. As I brace for impact on the bathroom floor, my past descends like Luftwaffe. I wish I'd never asked you to unbuckle your belt, peel off my dress on the concrete steps, the river bloated with murdered revolutionaries. Remember the detour? How I hid stones in my pockets after you zipped up your pants, in case I needed to drown myself. Now you give the orders. Tell me what to read, which side to take in the struggle, while Sasha teaches us to curse in German. Some mornings I pretend to sleep through the dawn raid, all fury and lockstep. I want to lay stones on your grave, but I line them up on the sink, my pebble army watching over me as I stick 2 fingers down my throat again. This is how the end begins, wanting to be remembered and forgotten among tombstones, forging my own name with all that is broken.
It's beautiful. Arranging ghosts inside napkins. It shows, the weight of history that is in Berlin, everywhere in every building.
There's so much in there. It's like 4 different poems at the same time.
I know. I think that at some point I'll end up, extracting the different strands of these 4 different poems that are there and writing 4 different. Yeah.
Well, that's a really interesting idea. This
right?
Potentially being the genus of 4 narratives or something. So Sasha, you mentioned Sasha in it. Can you say a little bit more about who Sasha is?
Well, Sasha was actually, was a real person. So this is, all combinations of lots of people, but Sasha was a kid that I knew in Berlin. He was a punk and he was great. And he used to teach us how to swear. So all of that's true. All my rubbish German swear words come from Sasha. I don't know where Sasha
how much
is.
German do you
know? This poem. Ein kleines bisschen, a little bit. Yeah. I don't know, maybe Sasha will read the poem one day and think, I made it into Rebecca's poetry. Yeah. He loved the Clash. He used to ask me to explain Rolling Stones and Clash lyrics to him and then teach me how to swear in German.
Sounds like a nice exchange.
Right.
Yeah. And
there was some great German music in the 80s, actually, on there in Berlin.
Absolutely. So I was there for the kind of explosion of the techno scene. So that was pretty amazing.
Yeah, it was a historical moment in and of itself.
Yeah, exactly.
And
Berlin feels like this poem, though. There's so much to say about it, and I think I got so excited writing this because there's so many layers. There's so many things that I want to talk about with this poem.
Yeah, given that kind of ambition for how much you want to express, really it's quite short. It's I mean, did you feel kind of satisfied after you'd finished it that you'd kind of included all the themes that you'd wanted to? It's not a particularly short poem, but it's short potentially for what your vision was for it.
Yes, I think it probably could have continued. Although I'm a real I don't write poems that are that long. My poetry tends to be after a page. I start to kind of think, oh, I'm done now. Has to be finished after a page. And I admire poets who can go on for far longer. I think I worry a little bit about losing the reader, but with a poem like this, yes, I felt like I had to contain it somehow. It was big. And it was, potentially going to explode all over the place.
But it's also very humble
to contain it.
In the same way that, I feel like Germany can be really humble.
Yeah, that's a really interesting. Yeah. I didn't want to make it. I mean, I think these are the things that, I'm aware of what it means to drop these hugely loaded concepts into a poem, right? Like Kristallnacht. And to think, I was writing about a particular time just post reunification. And I think, I worried on some level that there's too many big themes in this, but essentially it's a personal poem, right? It's about grappling.
I think it's great. I think it's really interesting for the fact that it has these massive themes kind of jostling for position. They're all kind of interweaving, and and it's in that way it's kind of symbolic of what Berlin is, right? It is a place that is kind of, it's haunted by its history, but it also has embraced its history, and it's also a place that's vibrant and is creating its own future as well. So this is where the poem's great. You've really encapsulated all those Berlin itself, But
thank you.
Why did you call it Alexanderplatz?
Because that was the part of East Berlin that I was living relatively close to, and it loomed large. I mean, literally, the TV tower looms large, Alexanderplatz. I was looking for. I knew I had to name. Titles of poems are thorny, right? You know, I initially it was literally the street name that I lived on, and that's not. It doesn't resonate as much. So I was looking for a landmark. I was looking for an East Berlin landmark. That I'd spent time in.
Yeah, what stuck with me is this word, you know, drown myself, because you have other poems about people drowning in there. And so you have you like a brother who drowns, and you have yourself who drowns and then survives. How do you link all these themes together? Is it intentional?
Yes, I'm really interested in water and in losing yourself in water. I wanted to, with Alexanderplatz, I also talk about the river being bloated with murdered revolutionaries. And that was important to me too, because I spent a lot of time at the river, the Spree in Berlin, thinking about Rosa Luxemburg, murdered and pushed into the river. Yeah, I you know, obviously my collection is riddled with death, and the death comes in many forms, and I think the water is one of them. So it's very resonant for me, for sure.
Yeah, can I just like my last question about this poem? It feels like the poem is almost saying that you can't live there, or there's something about the place that you struggle to find peace there. Is that, maybe that's just my reading?
No, I think that's correct. I think that's a really good reading of it. I did feel, I've been back a few times. I lived there for quite a stretch during the time that the speaker, you know, the poem is set, and I struggled with leaving, but I struggled with the idea of staying too. It felt like a really complicated place, especially for me at that time, in late adolescence, early adulthood. It didn't feel like a stable place. So that instability, I think, is, you know, political instability, personal instability. That's very much intentional in the poem.
Yeah, and the way I see kind of the structure of the book is that, so, you know, you're laying out your life and people of the past, and then from the title poem, I feel like the way I saw it is that it's kind of like alternative futures, or the way you took the past to write a different ending from there on. Is that correct? Or
yes,
yeah,
yes, I think so. Yeah, I just, you know, I'm glad you sensed that. I mean, the title itself, "Permit Me to Write My Own Ending," is sort of speaks to all of that, doesn't it? I want the speaker of these poems to be able to write their own ending. Some of those endings are quite brutal. You know, they come, whether it's the speaker's friends or family, their deaths, or their own struggles with belonging. I think that's very much part of it. This idea of having choice in where things end. And that's, as a poet, I wanted that choice with the chronology. We've talked about this already, but the chronology and the way I ended the book too.
Yeah.
I wanted to bring childhood back at the end, and then end with a very adult poem.
So the last poem is very dramatic.
Yes.
So you're killing someone.
I have not murdered my husband and buried him in the garden, just so that you know. Some people said to me, well, you know, this is when it's funny when you have these conversations and you have to remind people that it's a poem.
Yeah.
It's like, this is
You're familiar with that,
yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. Everybody's always like, "Are you okay? Like,
is everything all right?" Yes, exactly.
Although I don't do many kind of alternative realities in my poems, they're kind of revisiting past emotions. So it's a kind of different, "Are you okay?" It's not really, "Have you murdered someone? Are you okay?" It's like, "Are you going to kill yourself? Are you okay?" But
it's right. This poem was very cathartic to write, and I think there's, you know, my book is, and a lot has been written about this already, and I think some of the reviews have picked this up, but there's an anger at the patriarchal culture. There's anger at experiences that happened to the speaker during childhood and adolescence. And I think it was really important for me to end the collection with what I consider to be a mature poem about domestic violence, and the speaker wanting very much to have an ending that worked for them, right? That they felt, it's a powerful, certainly a dramatic poem, but it was important for me to end that way.
Yeah.
Can we hear that?
Yeah.
Yeah, if you don't mind.
Another one that's not planned, but
that's fine. No. I'm happy to.
I just always imagine the audience.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Well, they have to buy the book to get the end.
Yes, they're going to have to buy the book to read the last poem in the book. And I should say that this poem, Last Rites, was shortlisted for the Red Wheelbarrow Prize in the US. So it's
when is the book out?
The book comes out on March the 28th, 2 weeks today. It's very exciting in the US and the UK, so everybody can get copies.
Oh.
Okay, so I will read Last Rites now. Last Rites. Finally, I figure out how best to kill him. Dead weight on the kitchen floor, the night loaded. When it's done, I'll dig a man-sized plot in the groin of the garden, wedged between the broken fence and eager clematis. I'll work the soil hard, deep enough for 10 men. Throw in my chipped teeth and pulled hair, black nightshade, a blue jay feather for luck, scrawled notes and stale prayers, the cold shoulder from next door. I'll sprinkle his eyelids with shards from beer bottles hurled with the force of a gale meeting my jaw, consequences that bruise and swell. Spare keys from nights I locked him out, children in bed, itchy blankets smother their hot breath while I heap earth on his body to keep him dead. I prefer the slap of moonlit bracken, heft of a rusty shovel, my hands bloodied. He deserves the worms, not the north-facing sun or horse-chestnut shade. I'll wash him off me and plant perennials, something bright that will flourish among weeds, next door's curtains threadbare from twitching. If they ask, I'll say it was the old tabby, the children's favourite. In spring, when the blossoms dance wildly, I'll scrub my fingernails clean and invite the neighbours for tea.
The end is so humble. Invite the neighbours for tea.
Well, if you're covering up a plot in the garden, I suppose, and you want to invite those neighbours who've been twitching their curtains around, you'd have to make them tea.
So it's interesting to me, you kind of prefaced talking about this poem with some humor, right? In terms of like, oh yeah, like I haven't murdered my husband in real life. So it's interesting to me, when you read these poems, when you read this collection, everything is very severe, everything is very serious. It's a tendency in my reading to treat every poem sincerely. So I suppose the reason I say we're probably not going to use this in the recording is just for my edification. It's just interesting to know why does it feel like uncomfortable for you to kind of just talk about the poem too seriously, because almost it might be too close to the bone, too severe, etc.?
This particular poem, Last Rites. Yeah, I also feel like I just want to hold some space for the experience of domestic violence without necessarily talking about my own personal experience or any, family experience. I think that the as I've said before, the catharsis of this poem comes in a retribution or an ending that is imagined. Right. And so some of the imagery in the poem, the children in bed, the nights I locked him out, there's a reality to a lot of that. And then, of course, there's the fantastical element. I like ending with the idea that maybe the speaker killed him, and also the tabby, that maybe she just really lost it and killed everybody. And I was reading a lot of Shirley Jackson too he's one of my favorite American Gothic short story writers. So I wanted those details, the blue jay feather and all these other things. But yeah, alcohol abuse and domestic violence, but it's important for me to write about these things without having to explicate it too much myself as a writer. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I mean, to me, it kind of shows like almost humor in your writing. Which is playing with.
And it's interesting that, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but it's interesting, Tom, that you talked about the serious nature of reading this, the kind of, and in a way, yes, the poems are obviously serious and they deal with serious themes. And there are some poems that there's not laughter in it, but there are poems, and I think Last Rites is one of them, and there are other ones, Next of Kin is another, where there is humor. It's dark, it's gallows, but it's there. And that's important because that's very much, what I'm interested in as a reader, and also I think how I write. There is humor. You just have to dig around and find it.
Poetry to Rears is a podcast sponsored by Faulkner Press, an indie press that publishes poetry that takes you by the hand and leads you into the woods. You can get 10% off all books on their website, www.faulknerpress.co.uk, with the code POETRY10, as small letters POETRY10. You will find the code and the link in the description below. Thanks for supporting small businesses. Back to the episode.
Next of Kin. Our granddad fought the Germans, but I battled through lunches. My bloodline gathered in the kitchen. Uncles with 5 o'clock shadows mistake me for schoolgirls they lured with pocket money and promises. I pull myself together in their pipe smoke, arrange tins of beans in jaunty pyramids, kick shins of cousins beneath the table, their tree bark cheeks ruddy. Passing the sauce as past lives lurch across history's headland, victories chipper and hard won. I want to start fires in the bathroom, wear the alley like a cat in heat. Upend the garbage, take off my clothes, swear like a trooper, slice my thumb with a carving knife, mop the blood with my bread. But I please and thank you my way through dessert. Impossible, the things we don't say to one another, stewing like spoiled fruit and cream.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it kind of sets the tone for what you want to do after, which is explode.
Right, exactly.
You've got so much anger just stored in that you contain in politeness, right? It's like there's really like really strong images, like start fires in the bathroom, etc. Slice my thumb with a carving knife, and then it's like, but I please and thank you my way through dessert. I really like that contrast.
I think everyone can relate to these family meals, right? Everyone has memories of meals like this where we sat on our hands or didn't speak, or so much was going on or swirling around the table that we didn't understand. Yeah. And then all the things that we do understand when we're, kids, teenagers. We do know what's going on. We just don't know how to talk about it. So I felt like that was really important. All the desire, the pent up desire of the speaker compared to what she was actually doing, which was please and thank you.
Yeah. And it's kind of speaks to, we find it difficult to be vulnerable with each other as well, right? Like we get into a situation where everybody is very defensive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
The tension is palpable in the poem.
Yeah, I mean
you can really feel it.
It's quite impressive, what you say in the words, as well as the space in between the words, like what you don't say, which shows kind of the perspective of the situation as well.
And I think that's something that, that's why people will have to buy the book so they can see how the poem looks on the page. But I really deploy white space instead of punctuation here, and there's gaps. And I'm really interested in those gaps, the gaps without punctuation.
Yeah, I mean, you have a lot of poems that are like that have.
I know.
They're kind of
interesting enjambment.
Yes, exactly. I really, and that's what's interesting about that is those are the later poems that I wrote. I think I was writing in a much more conventional form for a long time, and then this really kicked in, and it enabled me to sort of find my footing. This use of enjambment and white space, and I do it a lot now. I really like it.
Yeah. And there's some poems where you put songs as well, little lines of lyrics.
Yeah.
Music's
like
really
like Rolling Stones.
The Rolling Stones, yeah, and even in annotated bibliography, there's references to the Smiths. Yeah, I actually have a playlist that I made for the book.
Did you?
Yeah, it's on my Instagram, and I made it public. Partly it was songs that I was listening to at the time that I wrote it, and songs that remind me of all these various points in my life.
Yeah, we're gonna
share it.
That's
a novel idea.
Yes,
it's a novel idea.
Put
on like a playlist in the background while you're reading.
Multi-sensory,
right?
Yeah,
art. Exactly. Yeah. Well, music's really important to me, and so there's obviously a lot of poems where I directly reference music that I was listening to, but then there's all the music that reminded me and that helped me to write the book.
Yeah.
What do you listen to now? What's your?
Oh, what am I shuffling at the moment?
What's on your pod? What's on your iPod?
What's on my iPod? Yeah.
Eloise doesn't know what it is.
I know what an iPod
right?
is.
The older folks out there can talk about what's on their iPod.
I was the last generation to have an iPod, I think.
I'm listening to right now. I've been listening to Young Fathers a lot. I love Young Fathers.
Oh wow, yeah, I saw them in Holland. Yeah.
Yeah, they're amazing. I think they're coming to the States.
It's like hip hop.
Yeah, and Billy No Mates. I'm really into Billy No Mates too. And then I've just been listening to a lot of stuff that I always listen to, like Elvis Costello and.
Oh wow! Yeah.
Yeah, so older stuff too. Yeah, got lots of different things on my and the playlist certainly permit me to write my own ending is very sprawling because I've got a very diverse taste in music. But yeah,
I can't wait to listen.
It was fun to put together to think about all the things I listened to as I wrote it.
So it sounds to me like that really does inspire your poetry as well. I mean,
for sure.
Is there a case that you listen to a song and it kind of puts you in a certain emotional space?
Yes, definitely. I listened to Let It Bleed, the Stones album, on repeat when I was trying to write some of these poems. Like it just kind of took me, and music is, I think it's one of the only art forms that can do that, right? That you really are transported back in time, that you can remember what it was like to be 15 when the first few chords of a song come on. So yeah, absolutely. And it gets those creative juices going. Sometimes it's so emotional I just had to just stop writing and go for a walk.
Bless you.
So listening to The Cure, I was like, oh my god, I have to just go for a walk now.
You know these lyrics that you put in the poems, how would you read them? Would you just tell them out? Would you try to sing them a little bit? Or?
Oh, I wouldn't try and sing them. I've got a terrible singing voice. No, I think in annotated bibliography I thought about that a lot because I reference Morrissey and then I also use a Smiths lyric. And in my head, I imagine singing the Smiths lyric, but that wouldn't go down well. It would be really bad.
Have you tried it? Or?
Really. I have not tried it. I've tried it personally, reading it out loud to myself, and thought, I'm never going to do that at poetry reading. That will be bad.
Yeah, that leads on to my question. So you perform live then?
I have done, and I will be doing more. So I've got a bunch of tour dates coming up for the book.
Oh, cool.
I've got tour dates in the States. I kick off my book tour in New York at the end of the month. And then I'm on the road, I'm going to the West Coast. And then I'm doing a London launch on the 8th of July, actually, which will be great. And I'll be reading in Leeds as well.
Oh, amazing.
In the summer.
So
Yeah.
check that out. Is it on your website?
And all the dates will be on my website, which is RebeccaFaulknerPoet.com. So you can check out the dates there. And I'll be reading with other Right Bloody poets in London on the 8th of July.
Yeah.
Oh, well, we should definitely go to that.
Definitely come.
Yeah. With Ollie's in London as well. Ollie O'Neill.
Yeah, that's right. So I think there's going to be a few of us who'll be there for that, which is exciting. I won't sing any Smiths lyrics, I promise. Not end well.
Do you want to read annotated bibliography?
And this is another one where I hope people buy the book so they can see how the poem is actually arranged on the page, because it is arranged like a bibliography. Annotated bibliography. 1. Sitting nocturnal close with our rope of brown hair, people mistake us for sisters. Foolishly, I believe we are something more, brimming and requited, hurling ourselves at the weather. Let me guard the limestone wall I build around you. Let me huddle in the romance of rickety plush stairs and no central heat, our flat damp with pencils, an anarchy of chimney pots and great expectations. To die by your side, the pleasure, the privilege is mine. After class, we pull up the drawbridge, coffee gone cold, styrofoam soft and wet against my teeth. 2. Outside, the June air is fragrant with piss and jasmine, but I draw lukewarm baths against the Yorkshire din, watch her run long fingers across crumbling spines of paperbacks, find the page, the quote, her body is the word. In the tub, she reads aloud in a voice she calls Chaucerian, bawdy and bonkers. You sound like Morrissey, I say, and she laughs and bangs her knee on the tap, which hurts because she's so good at accents and taking up space. Later, I cook and overdo it. Too much sauce and music and looking. 3. She has a way of making me feel I don't live here. I am uninvited. We have separate beds, but share my bed, and I never make a fuss. When rain floods the entryway, soaking the carpet, climbing the walls, I let it seep through my socks into her room, hold it cautiously between my toes, so cold, like a moat. It curls the pages of Beowulf, even though it's probably worth saving, but I don't. I stand in the damage that I can't undo, and she tells me to leave. 4. The flood, she says, and the kitchen mess, and my mates are a mess, but mostly me, I am. And she ties up her hair and goes out for a fast bike ride, swerving hairpin turns. I sit down, my jeans soft and wet against my thighs. My fingers drip onto floorboards, and I think, your body is not a word. Your body is not the only word. And I rearrange the books on her shelf and pitch forward slowly through the open window.
Really like the story.
Yeah, that's a good college and a university poem, I think.
Is that the reason behind the bibliography? Because you write so many essays at uni.
Yeah, you know, I did English at university, so I felt like I had to write a poem that was in the shape of a bibliography.
Yeah. the details are in the notes of the bibliography that no one reads at the end of the essay. That's right.
That's right.
Yeah. Your body is not a word. Your body is not the only word. What's the quote of? Is it a lyric? Or?
That's mine. That's just me.
Yours.
That's
okay.
just, I'm just throwing that in there too.
Well.
Yeah.
Just because it's
I should have said it wasn't. I should have said it was Chaucer.
No,
it's me. It's exactly. No, it's me. It's me.
Yeah, not just because it's like in italic. How do you call it?
It's in italics as well. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Lulu, you're great at giving inadvertent compliments.
Yeah.
You really. It's a talent. Yeah.
I don't try so hard.
Can I ask about what maybe you found the difference between performing for American audiences compared to European audiences or English audiences?
That's really interesting. Yeah, I've thought a lot about this, especially as I kick off.
Or maybe people's response to your poems, and and is there a difference? Am I just making a story up there?
It's really interesting, actually. I've thought a lot about this because I think there is a difference at poetry readings I'm based in the US and I do most of my readings here. So it's going to always be slightly skewed to audience response here. And I've done far fewer in the UK. And they've been great, but I definitely think there's a collective energy in the room in some US venues where I feel like everyone's kind of there for you. There's a very, I'm going to sound really terribly critical of American audiences, and I don't mean to. It's almost as if it doesn't entirely matter what you're saying. They want to give you praise. That's lovely and beautiful, but sometimes I wonder if they've actually heard the poem. There's a support and a level of support that's really beautiful. And I think I read last summer in Leeds, and it was wonderful. It was part of my friend's book launch. And there was a slightly more, I'm not going to say muted, but just the response while I was reading was different. And then afterwards, people had lots of questions. That just speaks to cultural difference in a way, I think. And I've had a whole lifetime of navigating that. But I think that, I wonder that so many of my poems they're quite English, I think. And they use references that are quite English. And so I sometimes think, I won't read that one in the States because I don't know if people will understand it. But that's silly because they're universal themes, aren't they? So even if the specific reference isn't directly understood, they can still understand.
Yeah, and a lot of people enjoy digging into references, right? They enjoy, especially with the publication now, they can kind of study it and Google it.
Yeah. And try and figure out where things took place or what the writer's talking about exactly.
That's it kind of makes me think of what we were saying about poetry audiences in general, which is you get different dynamics of response to poems.
For sure.
Compared to, as much as I
depends on the space as well.
Comedy. Oh right, the context, like the venue.
Yeah, it depends on the venue.
Like the hosts and everything. I feel like there's a wide fun.
But as much as I love and adore comedy, it's like there's really there's just different variations of laughing or not, right? Whereas in poetry, there's all these kind of strange, very human responses to.
Yes.
There's a very large spectrum of responses to individual poems and individual poets.
Yes.
And there'd be many responses, right, when we were at Verve Festival to poems that were sometimes there'd be like a groan, right, as a response to a poem,
or some gasps.
Gasps. Yes, exactly. Intakes of breath after a line when you think, oh my god, the line has really landed because everyone's gone.
Or there's the kind of empathy sound, right?
Yes,
like, this kind of and sometimes there'd be laughter, right? In different.
Yes,
so it's interesting.
It really is, and I'm not a spoken word poet, and I don't write funny poems, and so I definitely think there's something interesting that happens between each poem. So if you get up to read 3 or 5 poems, and they're quite heavy hitting, and not that cheerful, and then there's that very cautious moment of some applause. And you want to say, you can clap between the poem. It's all right. You can. I know I might have just punched you in the face with my words, but you can applaud. That's good.
Yeah.
But I think it's hard to know.
There was a poet who I won't name them, but at Verve Festival, the audience started clapping after they finished their first poem, and then they would say, no, you wait until the end. Clap just at the end.
Right, clap at the end. I think some poets maybe feel that they just need that silence, but that seems very, for me anyway, that's quite heavy. You're going to read, and then there's just this silence.
Like an orchestra.
Right, unless you try and fill it with a gag yourself in between.
Yeah. Do you enjoy reading your poems?
I do, yeah. I think that if you're not nervous a bit, then I think it's important to be a bit nervous when you read your poems, especially if you're reading them to a new audience for the first time, because it's a big thing to do, right? You want it to land. There's so much bound up in expressing yourself in this way, and some of it I feel very strongly. I wish this is why having the book in the world is going to be so wonderful. You want people to be able to see it too. I think I don't know, especially for me, I feel like that it's sculptural. It exists on the page. Obviously, it needs to be heard. But some of these poems, I want to be able to say, and now go and look at it, okay, please, because then you'll have the full effect of it. But yeah, I do. I enjoy reading my poems. I think it's important to hear it in in the poet's voice, right?
Yeah. So because you say you get more of some of the meaning through seeing it and reading it, but also you stress the importance of hearing in the poet's voice. What would be the ideal combo then?
That every person in the audience would have bought a copy of my book, and that they would sit there, and I'd say, "Now you can turn to page 41."
As a little book club.
Yeah. That's how we do it.
That's the dream. And then you can all look at my poem while you listen to me read it in my voice. Yeah, that would be the dream.
Like church.
Yeah, so
yes, it's like church. Take it serious.
So you can buy the book and then listen to the podcast, and that have the effect then.
Exactly. Yeah. And then I have this dream that maybe one day there'll be an audio version of the book.
Oh, would you like to do that?
That you can hear that. I'd love to do that. Yeah, I'd love to do that. I think it would be really good to get the tone of it right. Yeah.
Would you read you'd read your own?
I'd like to read my poems. Someone who will remain unnameless said to me recently, in terms of making reels for Instagram, and how I don't do a huge amount of that, but that you've got to hook people within the first 15 seconds. And I do think, but it's a poem, so there's not always the right hook, and I'm not wearing exercise clothes and squeezing a lemon at the same time. But she'd said to me, "Oh, I could read it for you and show you how it's done for a reel." And I thought, no. I know you can't read my poem for me. It's my poem.
Yeah, but I think
and even if,
also the poets on Instagram, people who follow you, they would listen.
Exactly, and that's I'm not trying to reach some. Obviously, I want people to hear the words and buy the book clearly, but I'm not trying to be an influencer.
Yeah, so
with my poetry.
15 seconds hook or 3 seconds hook. That's if you're really trying to grow your numbers and reach out to so many people out there, but it's just a platform to share.
Exactly.
There's no one way of doing it, and
right.
People.
And I see the value of it. And
yeah. There's so many writers who put blocks of writing and people read it, and you wouldn't think from an Instagram perspective that people would actually read it.
Right. It's sometimes, it's limiting in the way that you feel that you could only share a short poem. It has to be short. Either the text on the page has to be short, or you have to speak it and it has to be brief. Otherwise, people will scroll past it. And, when you think about it like that, I think, well, a lot of the poets who I would hope would stick around and listen to me read the whole thing, they're not going to just swipe or keep scrolling.
There's definitely a limitation that videos can only be 90 seconds, but
right.
I think sometimes you need a distance. So it's like you can be the artist, you can be the poet, and you can be the purist, right? Where you want the whole of your poem, you want it done right, correctly. And then I think sometimes there's part of you that wants someone else to come along and kind of take the crude decisions of, chopping it, taking the highlights, taking the bits that you necessarily wouldn't pick yourself.
It's
absolutely
artist separation.
It's
I'm a big proponent of that.
It's the difficult roles of being an artist, between writing the poetry, editing it, and then marketing it, and they're very different roles, and they're not.
And that's always what's so interesting when you have a publisher, because then you realize that these are the poems that they want to highlight, that whether it's for social media, that they feel are the best to highlight. And so of course it's a learning process, and you need to step back and release the reins a bit.
How was your experience of being published by Write Bloody UK? So
far it's been great. It's been really, they've been so wonderful, and just really listened, especially the cover of the book. I was really, really emphatic that I wanted to use a certain image for my book cover, and they were very, very just incredibly supportive, and went away and produced this wonderful design. So I felt really listened to.
It's a beautiful cover.
Do we have the design? We have the design though.
I can send you I think you've probably seen it on.
Yeah, I have it
on social media, but I can send you a copy of it too.
Yeah. Amazing.
Could you give us an ekphrastic poem of what the cover is?
I can give you a description, but whether or not I can spontaneously do an ekphrastic poem. Although I think in some ways many of the poems in the book relate directly to the cover image. So the cover image is taken by a friend of mine who's a photographer in Brooklyn named Laura Fontaine. She's Italian, but she lives in New York. And it's of her daughter half submerged underwater on holiday swimming. And it's an amazing, remarkable image. She's sitting quite peacefully, in the way I read the image, under the water. And she could be drowning, she could be floating. And I think it's beautiful. It's a really amazing color of green. And I love what's exposed by taking a picture underwater versus what's hidden. And it reminds me a little bit of me when I was a teenager. She looks a bit like me. And so as soon as I saw it, I thought, that's it. There's so many water poems and so many poems about drowning in my book. And I knew I wanted something that captured that ambiguity, which her image does.
That's perfect. That's Permit Me to Write My Own Ending by Rebecca Faulkner.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to be on the show.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, it was amazing.
It's been a pleasure to talk to you as well.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Lulu.
Hopefully we'll see you in the UK at some point.
Definitely. Come see me on July the 8th.
Yeah.
Great to meet you both. Thank you.
La brunerie secoue ses cheveux. De l'autre côté de la rue, l'homme les observe, de droit, de dos.
Thank you for listening to Poetry to Your Ears. This podcast is published as a newsletter on Substack. All of our content is published for free, but if you would like to support our work, you can become a paid subscriber. This will help us afford transcripts for the deaf and hard of hearing community, and anyone who would benefit from reading the podcast alongside hearing it. You can also support us for free by rating the show on Spotify and Apple Podcast or writing a review on Apple Podcast. Share the show with your friends, fellow poets, and poetry lovers. If you want to interact with us, you can follow us on @poetry2yourears on Instagram and @poetry2 on Twitter, or you can also write a comment on Substack. If you're American and you're listening to us, send us a message. Half of our listeners are American. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time.